Okay, I think we'll get ready and get started. Thank you guys for coming. Appreciate you joining our session. I know there's a lot to choose from, so really appreciate you guys joining us. Hopefully we will keep you awake during the calorie coma that's going to set in after lunch with some heavy food, a lot of pastas and stuff. So if you feel yourself nodding off and you want to stand up and exercise, do jumping jacks, we won't mind at all. So we're here to talk about extranets. I'm Brad Frales. I'm with Microsoft. Been with Microsoft about 11 years, primarily covering SharePoint over the last several. And this is Peter Carson with Envision IT.
Hey, everybody.
And we're going to be covering extranets, like I said. I'm going to be covering the first half, 3/4 of the talk, and then Peter will come back up here at the end. So
I'll get off the stage, let you go, Brad.
All right, thanks. So what this session is and is not, I want to set your expectations. This is a 200-level talk. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why you need an extranet and what the value of an extranet is. Because a lot of times when I talk to customers, they don't understand that. They look at an extranet as kind of an expense. And so I want to make sure you understand how you can justify an extranet. And then the second half of what I'm going to talk about is going to be about the planning process of an extranet. So what questions do you need to ask? What do you need to be thinking about when the topic of an extranet comes up? And then the nice thing is there's a session literally right after this one. I think it's in 201. It's extending SharePoint 2010 to your customers and partners. That's a 300-level talk. So if you like what I'm talking about today and you want to see more on the how do I do it, then head over to their talk right after this, and they can tell you a little bit more on how to do it. Okay? So just wanted to make sure all those expectations are set properly. Here's the agenda. We're going to go over the benefits of an extranet as well as the different kinds of extranets that I've seen my customers implement. We'll talk about the different technology investments that you need to make in an extranet as well as a guided discussion. So one of the things that I've done with my customers is I found that I've almost had the same question I ask every single time I talk to them. And so I've kind of packaged up all those questions into almost like a little session that you walk a customer through, or you can walk yourselves through, and it almost fleshes out the entire scope of an extranet. And so I want to share that with you guys so you can use it. We'll talk about the architecture as well as some search-driven applications leveraging FAST. It's kind of a newer concept since we've acquired FAST. It's been coming on strong lately that I've seen. And then Peter will come up and get a little bit more into the user provisioning side of SharePoint for extranets. Well, let me see. Before I get started, by a raise of hands, how many of you guys have an extranet on SharePoint? Quite a few of you. That's pretty impressive. How many are using it for more than just sharing documents? Anybody using it for like business intelligence or so that's a few of you, so that's good. Now, those of you that didn't raise your hands, how many of you have an extranet with like a competing technology or an FTP site or something like that? How many of you use email as your extranet? Don't laugh. There's a lot of hands going up right now. That's the primary way that people have done it traditionally. And what happens is some of you might use SkyDrive or something like that as well, where you pop it up there. The challenge with that is what happens when you hit send on the email? You have no idea, right? You don't know where it goes. You don't know who sees it. You don't know where it's going to end up. And so those things scare people when you start talking about extranet, especially if you're getting into very sensitive information. Think about like new products and product marketing or merger and acquisitions, things of that nature. And so that kind of those kinds of situations is what really prompts people to look at an extranet. And so that's what I want to talk about today is how do you do that in a very secure fashion. These are some of the different reasons why people look at extranets. So I've had a lot of customers that I've worked with, and most of them fall into one of these buckets. They either are working with partners or suppliers to improve some of their inefficiencies and helping their partners and suppliers understand what they need, share information with them that it's difficult to do otherwise. Interacting with customers is another big area that they focus their extranets around. So how do you give them information and improve your relationship with them? Can you give them some self-servicing capabilities so that they can come into the extranet and they can use some of the capabilities in there to improve their relationship with you or your customer? The other big topic is extranets for employees. So if I have a mobile workforce, let's say I've got salespeople out in the field, let's say I have field service engineers, and they need to access information. How do we set that up? So some people may not look at that as an extranet, but I tend to, because a lot of the same questions that I ask fall into remote employees as well. And so the architectures that we talk about, you'll see one of them actually kind of favors an employee-driven extranet, where the other ones favor more of a partner or customer-driven extranet. And we'll cover those in a little while. So those are kind of the business goals that you typically see on an extranet. What you also need to realize is you have stakeholder goals inside of a business as well. And so one of the things that I typically find where people fail in their extranets is they don't satisfy their stakeholders' goals. What are the stakeholders interested in? Especially the executives, right? They're the ones writing the checks. So how do you get an executive buy-in? Usually I find one of three things that's driving them. They either want to generate more revenue, they want to reduce cost, or they're interested in sharing information, but doing it in a way where they comply with their legal requirements, right? So what kind of either like federal legal requirements, state, or just internal requirements that they have to meet. And so those are three big things that executives do when you talk to them about extranets. And the biggest one is usually, how do I comply? Because they really don't want to share information and get information out there that shouldn't be out there, because ultimately people lose jobs over that kind of stuff. Information workers, very simple, two things. They want it to work and they want it to be easy. End users, right? Everybody knows them. That's essentially what they want. They want it to work and they want it to be easy. So when they click an email and they attach a file and they hit send, that's easy. Can you make your extranet almost as simple as that? And if you can, then you will get user adoption. If you make it too complicated, they won't adopt it, even if you meet the actual requirements. So you need to keep that in mind when you're designing it. And as I walk through that discussion, you'll kind of understand where the easiness comes in. Easiness for end users, though, doesn't always equate to easiness for the implementers and the IT guys, right? So you've got to keep that in mind. And then the last but not least, a lot of you in here are probably this group, the technical managers. Really, you care about two things as well from everything I've seen. You care about the infrastructure. What's it going to take? Is it new? Do I already have it? And then what's security look like? How do I do it in a way that secures everything? And that's really it. I mean, you can boil it down to a couple big requirements in each group that drive extranet. So now that we know our business goals and we know our stakeholder goals, then we can move into what we're actually doing with the extranet. And here's where it becomes really interesting. I've had several customers that start off with SharePoint as either an intranet or an internet site. And then what typically happens is, if they're on the intranet, they'll say, hey, this looks good on our .com site, or vice versa. And then economies of scale start to take over at that point. You can have the same group support multiple environments handling multiple different solutions. So when you approach them with the extranet, if you're already using SharePoint, it's not that difficult to do an extranet. I've actually found that extranets are deployed and start getting used faster than an intranet or than an internet site, a .com site. They're just easier, and the reason why, your scope is typically a lot smaller. You have to solve the security problem, right? We'll talk about that, but that's usually what I see is extranets are a lot easier to deploy. I've actually had a partner take the discussion that I'm going to show you guys, and in 6 weeks they went from nothing to completely deployed and up and running on an extranet. And so it can be easy if you make it, and that's kind of why the title of the session is easy. Extranets Made Easy. So there's three big areas that I want to cover as far as the value and why you do the extranet. Competitive advantage. If you think about dealing with a partner or a customer or something like that, what's your competitive advantage? What if you could provide business intelligence to this partner, supplier, customer in a way that other people couldn't? Who do you think they want to do business with? What if you could provide some self-service capabilities to them? You have a competitive advantage. They will want to do business with you. So by leveraging an extranet and doing it the proper way, you can really create a competitive advantage in the marketplace, and we'll get into it in a little while, actually increase your revenue and create some business growth. The other thing you get is cost reduction. So in a couple different ways. Number one, managing all that crazy extranet stuff, email, SkyDrive, FTP, all that stuff is expensive. By consolidating it all and putting it in one place, having controls in that, you actually reduce the cost. Because I had one customer tell me once that anytime a document got leaked to, like a marketing document, got leaked out to the press, it would cost them upwards of $100,000 to figure out where that came from, how it got leaked, and track everything all the way back. Could take them weeks to figure it out. What if I could provide a way for them to track that and figure it out the second that it got leaked? They would know within maybe 5-10 minutes who accessed that document last. How much would that be worth? It pays for the extranet like that, right? So cost reduction is good. The other thing is if you provide some of the capabilities that I've talked about as far as self-service capabilities, business intelligence, guess what your customers and suppliers aren't doing whenever they need information? They're not picking up a phone. They're not sending an email and waiting for a response. They're going to a login, they log in, they get their information right when they need it, and they're off and running. So you don't have to have people picking up phone, answering emails, stuff like that. You can appropriate your resources where you need them instead of fulfilling stuff that you can automate, right? The last one is business growth. If you are doing what I've talked about with competitive advantage and your cost reduction, when it comes time for some of your partners and customers to do new ventures, maybe it's a new product, maybe it's going to market, maybe it's they want to implement new pricing strategies or structures or things like that to benefit you, who do you think they're going to want to do business with? If you're providing them something that nobody else does, it can be very, very powerful because they will want to do business with you because you make it easy, right? Just like the end users want it easy, guess what? Your customers, suppliers, they want it easy as well. And you think about it, when we go out and do business just ourselves individually, what do we want? We want the big easy button, right? So create that easy button for your customers and your suppliers and partners, and all of these things can happen. When it comes to extranet, there's a lot of different requirements. This is just maybe half of them, right? I mean, an extranet can be used in a lot of different ways, have a lot of different requirements that are involved in it. But make no mistake, there's one, and it's right in the middle, that is bigger than any and all the rest of them. Security. You need to talk about it first, middle, last, and every day thereafter. And don't be scared of security. Because the worst is for you to go in, I've seen it, they go in and they don't want to ask the hard security questions because they don't want the answer, because they're afraid they won't be able to handle the answer, right? The old Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson scene, you can't handle the truth. Guess what? You can handle it. Security on an extranet can be done, and it can be done very, very powerfully, and it's not real difficult, okay? So make sure you're having those security discussions every chance you get so you can understand what they are. Because if you don't know what the requirements are, you're not going to meet them, and then what's going to happen? Something's going to get out, the executive's going to come to you and say, why didn't it happen? And you're going to be, well, I didn't ask the question, so I didn't even know how to solve that, right? So make sure you're talking about security everywhere. So why are we talking about SharePoint here? Most of you are probably, bought into SharePoint. That's why you're at the conference. SharePoint is one of the few platforms out there that I've seen that handles all the different scenarios that I've talked about. It can do basic collaboration. It can do search, content management. It can do business intelligence. It can get into your SAPs. It can get into your Oracles, your Dynamics, all the different line of business systems that you have, and pull the information out. It also has good security. And then it also has security around it, which I'll cover in just a little while, the different products that go around that to help ensure your security. Now, I've included some screenshots here. Most of you have seen all this. I'm not pretending that this is the first time you've seen this. I mainly am including these screenshots, so when you go back to your companies and your customers, if you want to take these screenshots and use them because they may not have seen them, you're more than welcome to do it. So this is basic document library, being able to do an announcement to your partners, stuff like that. This one's kind of interesting. I don't know how many of you are using the new digital asset management capabilities in SharePoint 2010. So one of the scenarios that I have with a customer is they do and a lot of large customers do this, they do a lot of outsourcing of their video, their audio, their brochures, and things like that to creative companies. Those files can get very big. You cannot email those back and forth. And so what do? They create an FTP site, they email a disk, they mail a disk, they do all kinds of things. So now what you can do is you can set up this extranet site to where you can have a place for you guys to collaborate on these video files and look at them and upload them and have access to them. So that's actually saved a lot of money for one of my customers. Business intelligence, so that's a big one. Whether you want to use your basic like Excel services and KPIs, or whether you want to get pretty sophisticated and use Performance Point, we have an entire range of business intelligence, and there's just a bazillion topics this week on that. So if you're interested in that, make sure you hit one of them. The one down on the bottom right is kind of interesting. I don't know how many of you have seen and used the new Visio Services capability, but imagine taking a business process, mapping it out in Visio Services, putting it on your extranet, and when your customer logs in, they get to see where they're at in that business process. Maybe it's a fulfillment, maybe it's a order tracking, maybe it's, hey, they had a problem and they need to see, find out when this problem is going to get solved or something like that. So Visio Services can come in pretty handy here as well. Search, I think you guys have seen this ad nauseum this week, so this is a basic fast search screen. I'm going to talk about a different way to use fast a little bit later, but obviously fast or just regular SharePoint search can be pretty powerful. The thing I would say about search, the longer your extranet exists, the more you need search, right? How many times have you gotten the phone call of, hey, I need to see what this purchase order was from 6 months ago or 3 months ago or something like that. They're trying to do some reconciliation. So by the longer it's around, the more documents you get in there, search becomes a very powerful piece of the extranet. So don't forget search. You can also, obviously, with SharePoint, get into all your back-end systems, get into SAP, Dynamics, all those things, pull that information out and show it as well. This is where you start getting into some of the self-service capabilities. Makes extranet a little more complex, but we'll talk about that here in just a little while as far as what you need to prepare for there. Now we're going to get into some of the security aspects of an extranet. So I'm going to cover all these technologies. By no way am I saying you need them all, okay? But you need to understand where they play. Because once again, when you ask the security questions and the answers come back, you need to know what your technology to solve that problem is going to be. So first and foremost, you need forefront protection for SharePoint. If you think about what you're doing in your extranet, you're having people potentially load documents from an unmanaged desktop or laptop or whatever into your environment. You don't know what's in those documents. So you need some protection. You need some virus scanning. You need to understand what kind of information's in there so you can potentially block it or quarantine it. And so that's what forefront protection does. And so you need to understand that and make sure you have that one in there. That one's almost a must, unless you have a different product that does that already. The next one is Forefront Protection Manager for the desktop. So I have some customers, not many, it doesn't happen that often, but I do have some customers that will require anybody to access the extranet to deploy Forefront on their desktops, especially maybe like contractors and stuff like that. That way they know that it's protected before it connects in. Don't see that too often, but I put it there because I have seen that. Unified Access Gateway is another technology that you need to understand. What that is it allows all of your extranet users to access the extranet through a centralized gateway, essentially. You can now put policies in place. You can direct people to the right areas that they need to go to. You can clear caches. You can manage sessions. You can do all kinds of things with Unified Access Gateway. So make sure that you understand what that is. Most SharePoint people aren't going to know a lot about these. So make sure you involve your infrastructure guys who should know a lot about these already. Anybody heard of rights management services out there? Anybody using it? Several of you are. So what rights management does is it allows you to encrypt an Office document so that way wherever it goes, it's now protected. And the only person that can access it is whoever I've said can access it. So if I create this document, I encrypt it, and then I say that Joe can open it but Sally can't, and somehow Sally gets the document, when she double clicks on it, it says, sorry, you don't have rights to it, you can't open it, and it's encrypted. There's no way she's going to get inside it. Okay? So imagine that leveraging on SharePoint. So when documents leave SharePoint, they're encrypted and protected. Okay? We'll talk about that a little bit later and where that plays into it. And then the other big technology here is Active Directory Federation Services. So that is the ability to basically, if you're working with a partner or a customer who has Active Directory, one of the things you really don't want to get in the game of is managing users, user IDs, when they go, when they leave the company and all that kind of stuff. So what you can do is you can essentially hook up their Active Directory to your Active Directory and create a trust. And then you can, when people log in, you're actually asking their Active Directory, hey, is this guy still good? Can he access it? Stuff like that. And then they'll authenticate him. So it can make that user management process a lot easier. And by far, that's not all the security products. Those are just the biggest ones that I see used the most often. Now, one thing I do want to talk about, for those of you that may not know, there is, so SharePoint inside, this isn't going to be a licensing discussion, but I do need to cover it just so you understand. There is another version of SharePoint called SharePoint for Internet Sites, okay? Inside the firewall for your employees, SharePoint is licensed with a server and a client access license for everybody that's accessing it, right? Well, imagine if you take that model and you put it on the Internet. That's going to get really expensive, right? So we've created another way to license SharePoint for people that are not employees, and that's what this is. It's called SharePoint for Internet Sites. There's a standard edition, and that includes most of your basic capabilities around document management, workflow, and all the standard collaboration type features. There's also an Enterprise edition. And this one gives you access to everything inside SharePoint. And these are for unlimited numbers of users. But I do want to stress non-employees. So you can't get this and let employees do it. You can't do that. So if you have more licensing questions afterwards, feel free to come up and talk to me. I'll do my best to answer those. Probably direct you to your account manager. So FAST is also licensed, can be licensed for internet use as well. So it's a similar licensing model for FAST as SharePoint whenever you want to use FAST in the extranet. So we have covered kind of the whys and the value of SharePoint as an extranet. And I want to stress once again, if you're already using SharePoint either as an intranet or an internet, the extranet should be even easier, especially if you kind of follow the process I'm going to outline and you have some decent experience around some of the security products that I mentioned. If you have that already, extranet should be a lot easier than your intranet or your internet site. Don't stone me if it's not, but it should be, okay? So what I want to do now is move into the second half of my discussion, which is around the process, the planning process of building an extranet. Okay? This process should pull out all of the requirements that you need for an extranet. It's basically going to cover your different usage scenarios, the user bases, authentications. You guys can read that right there. What I do is I basically will ask a question to, for instance, what is your usage scenario? How are your users going to use the extranet? Once I ask that question, I've seen a very common pattern for the answer for all these questions that I ask. And so what I've done is I've categorized the answers into one of three complexity levels, if you will. One I call out of the box, okay? Doesn't necessarily mean it's out of the box. It's an out of the box level of effort, right? So it shouldn't be extremely complicated. It should be kind of easy. It's like saying using Active Directory with SharePoint. That's not very difficult to do, right? It's an out of the box type experience. Using LDAP is a little bit different, right? So I have out of the box. I also have configuration. So that's kind of a medium level of effort. And then I also have customization. And so that, when you see the answers, I kind of categorize each one by one of these three. And so the idea is, if you walk through all these questions and you answer out of the box on every single one of them, remember that 6-week timeline I told you about? That's pretty realistic. If you answer customization on all of them, you're not going to do it in 6 weeks. Okay? So all this is meant to do is help you define the scope and the level of effort that's going to be required to do the extranet. Does that make sense? So, and keep in mind, these are just guidelines. So for instance, if you guys have, if I say writing some code is a customization, but y'all have a rock-solid development department, it may be a configuration rather than customization for you guys, okay? So just keep that in mind. I don't know everybody's skill levels in all the different areas. So, first question I ask, how are you going to use the extranet? Big three that I see every single time. First one is just for, like most of you guys already answered, basic document collaboration, okay? That one's easy. It's out of the box. Everybody knows how to do it. It's not very complicated. The requirements are pretty simple. The next one is business intelligence. This is kind of the second one that I see. And so that's providing information, through Excel services, KPIs, things like that. And so this one can be either configuration or customization. If all you're doing is Excel services, KPIs, Visio services, stuff like that, I consider that more of a configuration level of effort. If you're going to get into performance point, and you're going to hook into some databases, SQL analysis services, get some cubes up, things like that, I typically consider that one a customization because you're kind of leaving the world of SharePoint to get something else and bring it in. Okay? So depending on which way you're going, that could be a configuration or a customization. The last one that I see is self-service. And so this is the one where you're actually plugging into your business systems. You're pulling out data. You're showing it to them. You might be running a business process. You're going to get pretty complicated. More than likely, you're writing some code. You're making something happen that's on a more of a customization level. So that's how I kind of answer each of these questions. Now that you've seen the one, hopefully you kind of get where I'm going with the different answers. The next question I ask, how are my users going to authenticate? Okay? The easiest one, Active Directory. If you're using Active Directory, SharePoint loves it. We're all good. Everybody knows how to do that. The next one I'll see is Active Directory Federation Services. Now that one's a little more complicated. Once again, if you've already done it with customers, then this one isn't going to be as difficult. If you've never done it, this one might fall into customization. So I kind of put it right in that middle, because once you've done it once, and we're starting to see that more and more people do it, then it becomes a little bit easier to do. And then the last one is, okay, we're not using any AD. We're going to go with LDAP, a custom authentication provider, maybe SQL authentication. I call that one customization because it's usually going to get more complicated. You're involving something, that's not really SharePoint, especially if you get into, like LDAP or something like that. Not that it can't be done, just makes it a little more complicated and difficult to do. The one thing I would tell you to do, something to think about, is make sure you leverage claims-based authentication in SharePoint. If you're not familiar with that, that's a new capability in SharePoint 2010, and that makes your life a lot easier when you start passing user IDs and needing to authenticate against different sources, either inside SharePoint or outside SharePoint. Okay? And I think there's a session on this actually later this week, a deep dive, a 400 level. I think it's like the last one of the week. So if your brain is still available then, have at it. It's a 400 level one. What are the user bases? Okay, so if it's employees, piece of cake. They're already in Active Directory. You're using Active Directory to authenticate. That's an out-of-the-box solution. Contractors, probably the same thing. You probably already have them in your Active Directory, so authenticating, not that big a deal. Where it gets more interesting is when we start talking about people outside the company, partners, customers. And that really falls into two groups. The first one is, are you going to use Active Directory for your partners and customers? And if you are, then, and you're going to use just standard Active Directory, you're going to manage the users and stuff, that's kind of an out-of-the-box type of experience because, once again, it's just Active Directory. If you're going to use ADFS to authenticate these partners and customers, more of a configuration, which we kind of talked about. Now, where it gets really interesting is if you're not going to use Active Directory for your partners and customers, then that's where it's going to be a little more interesting in how you implement that and what you do. And so I call that one a customization level. Okay? The last two go kind of hand in hand usually. If you say you're going to use Active Directory for everything, makes it pretty easy. If you're going to use ADFS, should be easier. If you're not going to use either one of those two, no matter where your user base is, it will get more difficult. Next one. There it goes. Okay. So now, the next question I always ask is, how are you going to provision your users? So I need, Sally the administrator needs Joe the executive at another company to be able to access documents that she's putting on the extranet. How does she do that? Okay? So the first one, the most common, Sally sends an email to IT. IT goes, creates a user account, or adds them to so that if they're using ADFS, leverages that, puts them in SharePoint so that they know so they can have access to them, and they're off and running. Okay, that's the easy one. Puts a lot of burden on IT, and Sally's kind of looking at IT as a gatekeeper. It's not quite as easy, stuff like that. The next level would be to create a front end for Active Directory. So I've had some customers do this. They actually write a little, it's not a complicated app, it's just an app on the front end that front ends Active Directory. People go in, they request a new user, they give them a username, and the app simply adds them to Active Directory, gives the information back to Sally, and has Sally email that login information over to whoever that user is. Sometimes the app might automatically send an email. So that's another way that you can do that. And then that one's I kind of call configuration. Once again, that might be simple if you've already got it or if you have a good development shop. It could be really hard if you don't have much of a development shop. The last one is self-provision through SharePoint. So imagine simply going to SharePoint, having a form pop up, type in the information, hit submit, workflow kicks off, goes to the manager, manager approves it, adds it to Active Directory, notifies Sally, sends an email off, and that whole process is automated. I call this one customization simply because you're going to be designing a process that's going to touch a lot of parts. It might not be that difficult if you've already got a lot of experience doing that kind of stuff. So once again, if you think back to our stakeholder goals, that information worker, what do they want? They want easy. Which one of those is easy? The last one. Unfortunately, that's also typically the most complicated one. So you kind of have to weigh some of these things when you're trying to decide. Now, when it comes to user provisioning, there's some important questions you need to ask. And there's no right or wrong answer here. You just need to understand these. The first one is, who owns the user? Okay? Why is that important? Well, what if that user leaves the company? Okay? It's an external user. What if they leave the company? Who's going to know that that user left the company? Probably their main contact at your company, right? And so then they would know, hey, I need to remove the user. Is it IT that owns the user? There's no right or wrong answer. You just need to answer that question because now, and I have some customers actually have a property on that user, either in SharePoint or in AD, that basically says, this is the person in my company that owns this user. So if there's any problems with that user, they know who to go talk to. Maybe that user is caught in the audit trail and they were the last one to touch that document that got sent off. Okay? I need to go find Sally, who owns Joe Executive, as our internal owner. So you need to understand that. Password resetting. Okay? I simply tell everybody, follow whatever password resetting rules you have inside your company, okay? They've probably already been vetted, legal's on board with them, everything's there. Just follow the same thing. If you don't have it, I'd encourage you to get it, but if you don't, then don't put it on there. If you've got every 30 days, put it on the extranet the same way and manage it the exact same way so you don't have two different processes. User validation. This is another one that you need to think about. How do I know that this user is still a valid user? Okay. Do I send them an email, see if the email bounces? Do I contact the owner of the user? You just need to define how you're going to validate that that user still needs access to the extranet. Okay. Once again, no right or wrong answer. You just need to define what that is so you can implement that control. User expiration. How are you going to expire the user? I would suggest like every 30, 60, 90 days, something like that. That needs to go kind of hand in hand with the user validation, right? So you could make the user validation simply expire the user every 30 days and you're good, right? So once again, you just need to define what that is. And then last but not least, you need to do some user auditing. When did they last log in? What are they accessing? What are they hitting? You don't have to log all of that, but you definitely need the ability to do it, okay? And then let your legal compliance team determine how often they need to, or your security team, how often that they want to see that information. Okay, so we just covered user provisioning. Now we've got the user provisioned. How do I create a site? Okay? So I got all these users. Now they need to access stuff. I'm Sally executive. I need to create a site so I can stick some documents in and share it with these guys that I just provisioned. Site provisioning is very similar to user provisioning, right? If you're just going to send an email to IT, that's an out-of-the-box thing. IT is going to know how to do it. Sally's probably not going to like it as much because it goes in a list of other things that IT is doing, and eventually they get to it, right? You also have provisioning through a workflow. So, you know, Sally can go fill out a form and have it automatically provision a site. Or you could use self-provisioning through SharePoint. And so those are kind of the big three that I see everybody using. Once again, the last one is the one that I typically see end users wanting the most. It takes a little bit more effort to do, but once you get it, your adoption goes way up. Once again, some things you need to think about. Who owns the site? And let me give you an example of that. It seems kind of obvious. Well, wouldn't Sally own the site? Okay, well, that's one answer. IT might own the site. Okay. Or what about the account manager for the customer owning the site, even though he may not have created it, because he owns the actual relationship with the customer? There's no right or wrong answer, but you need to define it, right? So everybody knows who owns that site. And the owner may be different than the actual SharePoint site owner, right? They may be one and the same, they may be different. You just have to define what it is. Who gets to grant access to the site? Is that the person that owns it? Is that IT? You know, doesn't matter. You just need to define that so the process is in place. Site expiration, site auditing, just like with user expiration, user auditing. I highly encourage you to use site expiration on the extranet, okay? Because you're going to be putting information in there that you may not want to be sticking around for 20 years sitting out on the internet, okay? A big one that I see is NDA information. So the first question you have to ask is, does NDA information go on my extranet? Some people say yes, some people say no. It depends on what you're doing. If you're going to say yes, I have one customer who actually, when you request a site, you fill out a kind of a form, and in there you're asked, hey, is this NDA information? And if it is, they actually use a completely separate site template than a non-NDA information. And they apply rights protection to all the documents that are inside that NDA site. Okay? So once again, just answer the question so you know how to protect that NDA information that's going to go inside your extranet. Records management, compliance department, security department, make sure they're a part of all these discussions because I guarantee you they have some input. And if you don't ask them about that up front, what are they going to do? They're going to block your deployment at some point down the line until you satisfy all their requirements. So once again, that security thing, it's not just a technology security thing. It's a process security thing as well that you need to make sure you answer all the questions for. Content. Okay, we got our site up. We got our users provisioned. They're authenticating. They can access this stuff. I'm dropping content in. How do I protect it? Okay? How do I know that it's protected? And there's really, once again, kind of three big buckets that I see everybody answering here. One, site or item protection level, right? Just the standard stuff that's in SharePoint. We all know how to do that. That's out of the box. It's there. A lot of times, especially if you're not putting NDA information in there, that's perfectly fine. Run with it and you're good. The next one I get is content types. Content types, so you can put requirement of metadata on it. Maybe you want to put workflows on it or information management policy, all the different things that are available to you in a content type. I put that when it's configuration, not because it's difficult, but just because you got to define all that stuff, right? How many of you have been through the content type definition process, right? I mean, it's not hard. It just takes a while sometimes. And so that's why I put it as kind of that middle level, because you got to go through it. Whereas the first one, you don't really have to. It's just done. And then the last one is rights management. So SharePoint, for those of you that don't know, and I put this one at customization because you have a different server that you have to set up and you have to connect it and make it work. So you can set up a document library inside SharePoint so that anytime a document goes into SharePoint and gets pulled out, it's automatically encrypted with the rights put on it. Okay? So that way, and you think, okay, well, if nobody can access it but people that are supposed to see it, why do I want to encrypt it? Well, once they pull it out, guess what happens? You don't know, right? They can download it. They can store it on their local drive. They could forward it to somebody. They can email it to somebody. With rights protection, it doesn't really matter if they do, because they won't be able to open it. And then the other thing you can do is when they open the document, you can require them to authenticate back to your rights management server so you can have an audit trail and understand what they are doing with that document, and you know who accessed it last. You can even put restrictions in place so that they cannot copy, like Control-C, highlight something, Control-C, doesn't work. They can't print. Now it doesn't prevent them from taking a picture, pulling out their phone or something, but it does add an extra layer of protection to that document. So if you need that, it's available. I don't see a lot of customers using this in the extranet because they're usually not putting a lot of sensitive information on there. But if you're going to get into like merger and acquisitions or joint product marketing, stuff like that, you want to look at rights management. The other big one is what kind of content is not allowed. So obviously, Forefront has the standard, watching for all the bad stuff that, nobody wants on there and in content and stuff. But what about things like Social Security number? What if a document has a Social Security number in it? Do you want that to go in your extranet? Maybe, maybe not. Bank account numbers or just account numbers in general, addresses or, what. If you're in the healthcare field, all the HIPAA stuff you've got to worry about. So there are partners of ours. That's called data loss prevention, basically watching what kind of content goes into your extranet, in SharePoint in general, but specifically here, extranet, and then quarantining it off until somebody can look at it. So we have some partners that do that. We don't really do anything like that, but there are partners. So if you need that capability, once again, understand what it is and then look for the solution for it. But that's something that I've seen some customers have to put in place. Auditing. How are you going to audit the content and understand what it is? So web, SharePoint, standard auditing. Most of us probably already do this today. Maybe you've got web trends or you're just using standard SharePoint logs, something like that. I kind of consider that out of the box, pretty easy, simple. You could also use the information management policy settings inside SharePoint. So that's one you can do. So you can turn on the ability to see who's downloaded it, who's opened it, who's looked at it, all that kind of stuff. Be careful with that one, because if you turn it on for every single document that's inside there, you're going to affect the performance and your audit logs will get very large. So make sure you really need it before you turn it on. But it's there if you do. So once again, ask the question. And then rights management, I mentioned that. You can actually do auditing with rights management. Here's the thing I always tell everybody. That first bullet right there underneath to also think about. Just assume you're going to lose information. Just make that assumption. Nobody ever wants to say that, but be the person that stands up and says, we will lose information, either because of an accident or on purpose. Okay? And simply ask the question, how do you recover it? How do you know how it got lost? Okay? And because I guarantee you, especially in larger companies, there are processes in place right now for doing that. So make sure you understand what that process is and that you can support that process, because I promise you, something will get lost. It may not be a big deal, but it'll be a big deal to somebody. And if you plug into that process early and often, then you won't have to worry about recovering of lost information and worry about your jobs potentially, right? Expiring content, a couple different ways to expire it. Once again, just like expiring users and expiring sites, I highly encourage you to think about expiring content. The easiest way to expire content, let the site expire, and it's gone, right? You don't have to worry about it. Now, where you get into a little bit of a problem is if your site expiration is like 90 days, but your content needs to be 30 days, okay? So if that's the case, then you can't use site expiration, and you need to use content types with the information management policy. You guys all know about going in there and setting the expiration date. If you don't, go to any of the records management sessions here this week, and they'll show you all about that kind of stuff. And then the last one is rights management will actually let you expire documents. So even if they're sitting on somebody else's desk, when they double-click it and try to open it, even if they have the rights to open it, if it's after the expiration date, they can't open it. Gone. Okay? You either have to reset the expiration date and they have to reconnect to get the new expiration date, or they just got to get a new document and it's gone. So once again, understand what that is. And then here's a big one, and this is for sites as well. Do you delete or do you archive? Right? Once again, no right answer, but ask that question. If you're archiving, how long do you archive it before you delete it? So, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, 1 year. I guarantee you the records management and compliance people have thoughts on that. And if you ask them, I'm sure they will share them with you. Other types of things to think about with regards to content. One of the things I had a customer do is, most companies will implement an intranet on SharePoint, or not most, but I have customers that do the intranet on SharePoint and a separate farm for the extranet, and we'll get into that in just a minute. And what they do is they've actually created a standard workflow on their SharePoint farm. So anytime somebody wants to publish a document out to the extranet, it's a workflow they can run, and it'll send it out to the extranet. Okay? Kind of cool. The nice thing about that is if you start seeing crazy stuff get out on the extranet, you simply plug into that workflow and start looking for that and stopping it or requiring approval or something else. So they actually didn't put much into the workflow. They just let it happen with the idea that, hey, at some point we may need to do some stuff, and so they'll plug into that workflow. Something they did. You don't have to do it, but it was just an idea. I thought it was kind of interesting. Categorization and tagging. You guys, the metadata management service, use it, love it, live it. It will help you tremendously on the extranet, just like it is on the intranet and the internet side of things. And then the last piece there, the social and communities. Just understand what your policies are around that. If you want to have multiple customers, multiple partners engaging in a single site, guess what? They're going to post information. They might do a discussion group. They might do something. Just understand what your policies and procedures are around that. What do you allow? What do you not allow? How are you going to moderate it? All that kind of stuff. So I don't have a lot of customers doing that on their extranet. On their internet site they do, but not on their extranet. And so if you do, just keep that in mind. You need to have that discussion. Architecture. So this is the out-of-the-box architecture. So, and this one is where I see it primarily used is whenever employees are accessing the SharePoint inside your firewall. I don't see this a lot when I've got partners or customers accessing internal SharePoint. People just get the heebie-jeebies about doing, yes, that was an actual word I used in this talk. They get that on whenever people are accessing their internal SharePoint. They're worried about segregating them, keeping apart. You can absolutely do that if that's what you want to do. Once again, you just need to make sure that your compliance, legal, security guys, all those guys are okay with it. The next one, this is the one that's a little more common. This is what I would call a configuration level architecture. So it's what we call back-to-back perimeter. This is your standard DMZ style of architecture where you've got UAG on the front facing the internet. All your employees and partners access that. Your farm is in the center, there in the perimeter, and then your employees will get to it from the inside. You guys are probably pretty familiar with that. And this is a more secure, this is probably the most secure way to do it. It is, more complicated. I don't know if it's much more complicated, but definitely a little more complicated. And so I would call this a customization. And so really what you're doing is you're putting a lot of your data inside your corporate network. So in case the perimeter gets compromised for whatever reason, then your data is actually protected. Last thing I want to talk about, then I'll let Peter get up here, is creating a search-driven application. So one of the scenarios that I'm starting to see a lot inside customers is they have information in their line of business systems that they want to expose. Okay? And so I've talked about a couple different ways to do that, right? BCS, you can write a custom web part, you could write some code, leverage web services, you can do this stuff. What's the one thing that all those things have in common? Whenever I go to the site, I'm connecting directly all the way back to the line of business system and pulling the data back. How many of your compliance security people are going to like that, right? Think about SAP. How many of you guys have SAP? If you have an SAP team, how many of them want people touching SAP directly, even if it's going through NetWeaver or whatever? Okay? Once again, they get the heebie-jeebies with that kind of stuff. So what we're starting to see with FAST in particular is you can take FAST and you can point it at these data sources. Let FAST index these data sources, pull the data back into an index, okay? So now it's stored in the index. The index can be inside that perimeter if you want it to be, right? Then when the partner, the extranet user comes in and they do a query, or maybe you write the query if you want to, where are they going? They're going to the index and back. Right? They're not hitting the line of business system. Now, you may have to worry about some lag as far as, how often you index it and stuff like that. But in general, that's a really easy way. Plus, which is going to be more performant? Going to the index and coming back? I mean, I think we saw a demo in the keynote that was like 0.2 seconds on 10 million rows or whatever. Very, very fast from a performance standpoint. So here's kind of what it looks like. You've got your line of business systems here. The crawler will go make the connection, crawl, index all the information. It will then, there it is. Then it will process that, which, by the way, with FAST, you can actually plug into that content processor and do some interesting things in there. Maybe you need to add some metadata or look at the content and do some processing on it. The indexer will grab it and then put it into the index partition. So now it's sitting right there. Okay? And that happens however often you have the crawler running. Okay? Now, end user comes along. They want to access that information. So what do? They go to the search center, they enter a query, and then what happens? The query processor goes to the index and returns it. There's no connection to the back-end systems. Okay? Very, very powerful stuff here. Now, where it gets really interesting is FAST actually has a query language of kind of like, so it's called FQL. Think of it very much similar to SQL, right? If you want to query a SQL database, you can select star, where, and all that stuff. So FAST has something very similar. So for instance, when a customer comes to a site, you can pre-write the query that says, hey, give me all of the product categories. And it'll pull, and all the product categories are in a database, but now they're in the index. It'll show all the product categories. They click on a product category. You dynamically build the query that says, go give me all the products in that product category. Show me all the products. And then when I click on a product, guess what it does? It goes back to the index, grabs all the product details, and it shows it. You're not writing any code. You're writing some simple FQL, and it's all XML and XSL at that point. So you can get some really, really powerful solutions leveraging search-driven applications, and you can even not get around, that's a bad way of putting it, but you can make your security people more comfortable because they're not accessing those line of business systems directly. Okay? So with that, I'm done. I want to just real quickly summarize. We covered the different types of extranets, right? Remember all the ones in the front, helping your suppliers, your customers. The benefits of extranets, so business growth, What were the other two? Business growth, reducing costs and competitive advantage, right? We talked about the different technologies, forefront protection, forefront UAG, rights management, ADFS, all those things, right? Remember that? We walked through the planning process. And then last but not least, do not forget about search-driven applications. They can be very, very powerful. They're kind of a newer concept. I believe there's a talk either later today or tomorrow on building a search-driven application inside Windows Phone 7. So if you're interested in that, go to that talk. I don't remember exactly when it is. One of my cohorts is delivering it. And instead of thinking Windows Phone 7, think Extranet and SharePoint, but it'd be the same kind of concept. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peter and let him finish out the talk.
Thanks, Brad.
Yep.
Good job. So my name's Peter Carson. I'm the president of a company called Envision IT. I got my contact information up here, so if you need to get a hold of me later, by all means. But we'll be around after to answer questions as well. So I'm going to focus mainly on user provisioning. So Brad talked about a lot of different things to think about in the extranet. One of the key ones for people is how are we going to create the accounts for these people outside of our organization, and where are they going to live? How's that going to be managed? So I want to start with just getting some categorizations down on the types of users that we're going to be talking about. So I want to include the internal users. Brad talked about an extranet for staff. We do see those scenarios where you've got remote staff coming in, and it really is like an extranet. And even just your staff that want to work occasionally remotely, how do they come in through that? What does that experience look like? Then we have what we call managed users, and there's sort of two categories for that. There's the managed AD users, so you want to keep them in Active Directory. Generally, we don't recommend you keep them in your corporate AD. You want to set up a separate AD in your DMZ, somewhere secure for those people. There are certain situations. We've done a number of board of director portal implementations where you've got a fairly small number of people and they're very trusted to the organization. That makes sense to keep them inside your corporate AD. Otherwise, you do want to keep them outside. Sometimes, though, people don't actually want to keep a separate domain inside their DMZ. They want to keep it fairly simple, so you can actually set up a SQL database. It's called an ASP.NET DB. You can keep those user accounts and the passwords. They're still encrypted inside of their database, but from an infrastructure point of view, it's a little simpler to manage. And then the last category is federated users, people that are outside your organization, but you've got a trust relationship with that organization. You want to leverage that. You want them to use their own credentials within their organization to come into your extranet site. So let's take you through what that looks like in different scenarios. So this is the kind of the back-to-back scenario that Brad was showing you before, where we've got a DMZ, we've got the SharePoint farm inside of that DMZ, and on our left-hand side here, we've got internal users that are coming in and hitting that SharePoint farm. So one of the things we want to make sure that experience is good for your staff coming in. You don't want to have to set up separate accounts for your internal staff to hit the extranet farm. They should just use their regular AD credentials. If they already have authentication against their desktop, it should just happen seamlessly, and they go right into SharePoint from there. Sometimes there's challenges there because you want to have a mixed authentication zone. SharePoint 2010 is much better at doing that because you don't want to have separate URLs that your staff go to than what your external people go to. You want everybody going to the same site, so if they're trading emails, referencing links and such, they're all referencing the same place within that. And like I said before, you could have those internal staff coming from the outside. They still want to have that same experience. They're not logged onto your corporate network at this point, but they should be able to still use their corporate credentials, come in against their corporate AD, and work through that quite easily. Then we have our managed users coming in from the outside. They're going to authenticate either down to the Active Directory or to the SQL that you have in your DMZ. The last case, federation, is a little bit different. Has anybody set up federation with SharePoint 2010? A couple people? Okay. So just to be aware of how that works, what happens is as a federated user, I come to your SharePoint site and I hit it. And instead of seeing a login page on your SharePoint site, what happens is I actually get kicked back to my own environment. So one of the things you have to do is you have to set up a secure token service login page on your partner site. So you wouldn't do that on their behalf. You'd actually go to your partner and say, if you want to federate with us, you need to publish a login page for your Active Directory out onto the internet. So when your staff are on the outside, they can hit that page, generate a claim, and bring that back into SharePoint. Or if they only want to hit it from inside their partner's corporate network, they don't necessarily need to publish that outside, but they need to have that available and to be able to hit through to the SharePoint site. So those are really the 4 different scenarios that we want to talk about from an authentication point of view. So why would you want to use Active Directory versus SQL? So what are sort of the pros and cons of one versus the other? Certainly, Active Directory does have some infrastructure requirements on it. You're going to have to set up a domain inside your DMZ, and you want it to be completely separate from your internal domain. You may want a one-way trust so that your internal staff can authenticate through to that, but that's kind of the extent of the connections between them. The nice thing is, if you've already built a significant SharePoint farm in your DMZ, you probably have a domain there anyways, just to support the service accounts and the things that you need to build that kind of farm. And it does provide much richer policy and auditing. Brad talked about the logging, the auditing requirements around that. A lot of that comes out of the box with Active Directory. You want to know when people last logged in, how many password failed attempts have they had, what are the password expiry rules. He was recommending just adopt what you do internally. If you're using AD, it makes it very easy to apply those same sort of policies to your extranet as it does inside your internal domain. From a SQL point of view, though, it is much simpler. You don't need a separate domain around there. One of the nice things that a lot of our clients like to see is, let's use the email address as our username coming in. And it's difficult to use the username as an Active Directory account. In SQL, it's quite simple to do that. There's some technology we've built to get around that in Active Directory, but it does get into the customization side of things. But what I want to focus on mainly here is to take you through an actual example case. So I've actually picked one that's near and dear to my heart. It's Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada. I'm a Canadian. And this is an organization across the country. You've got a similar organization. Thank you. Others in the audience. A similar organization here in the U.S. But in Canada, there's 104 clubs across the country. They serve over 200,000 kids. And they have 700 service locations across the country. They're a very federated model, so they're not a top-down structure in terms of how they're organized. It's not a franchise type of model. It's very grassroots. So they want to support the local organizations, support best practices, and get sharing going, which obviously SharePoint is a great way to do that. So they approached us and said, look, we'd like to build a new public website, and we also like to create a new members extranet. SharePoint seems like a good fit for those. Can you help us out on that? We actually decided, why don't we not build two different sites? Let's actually build one combined site that brings those two things together. So we're getting the benefit of using SharePoint from a web content management and public website point of view, but we're also lighting up a members extranet as part of that. You can visit the site yourself. It's live and available on www.bgccan.com. And what I'm going to do here is actually flip over and take us right into the site. So this is the live site they're hitting off the internet right now. It's a SharePoint 2010 hosted site. Lots of cool content, great content in there from a web content management point of view. But what I want to focus on is the member side of things. So let's talk a bit about how the provisioning process works. And when we're looking at the spectrum of what Brad described, most of the decisions we made, unfortunately, were on the customization side. But I think the end result for the organization made a lot of sense around that. So the first thing we did is we wanted to keep it fairly simple. There's only 2 servers in the farm. We didn't want to set a domain around this, so we chose to use SQL as the authentication method under the hood. So all the user accounts are stored in a SQL database. They don't have a DMZ. They actually have this hosted out at a hosting provider external to their organization. So when you log in, you just provide your email address and your password. But let's say I'm a new member, I'm a staffer, a volunteer at one of the clubs, and I've never come onto the members portal. So I come in through here and do a register here. So this is where we've gotten into the self-provisioning side. So we want to create an ability for people to come in, identify themselves quickly through the site, and to create an account on here. So I'm going to go through this process of putting my information in here. And I'm just going to use a test email account that I can access later here. And a sheet, copy and paste that. Okay, what's happening with the console? There we go. And I have to choose what club I'm associated with. I'm in the Mississauga area in Canada. It's kind of central Canada, so it feels quite close to me. Now, the interesting point here, this is a little odd from a security point of view, but Boys and Girls is obviously a very inclusive organization. They didn't want to put big walls up from a security point of view. So the rule was basically if you know somebody who's a members portal member already, just name their email address in here. They'll get an email saying, hey, do you know this person? And if you do, if you can vouch for them, we'll let them in the door from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my own email address in here. It's going to get a little confusing when I flip over to my email because we're going to see both sides of those threads coming in. But you get the idea here. And interesting, as we've built this, we actually tied it into Microsoft Dynamics CRM as well. So as I'm putting all this profile information about myself, it's creating a members extranet account for me, but it's actually writing a contact record in a CRM as well. So they can track who's coming into the site and work through from that point of view. Is that going for me? There we go. Okay. So hopefully I don't have any nasty emails sitting in my inbox here. We'll see what we've got going on. It's going to take a minute for that to come in. So let me come back to the site for a minute while that's coming through. So we're going to see 2 emails coming through. One is going to come to me as the person registering on the site saying, hey, thanks for registering. You don't have access yet. We're waiting for somebody to vouch for you and approve for you. The second one to me is the approver saying, hey, can you approve this person? So if we come back to the site, ultimately what we're going to do is want to log in here. Just while we're waiting for those to come through, Brad mentioned the password reset side of things. This is a very important thing from an extranet. You know, it tends to be an infrequently used kind of thing. As a partner, maybe I might go for a month, 2 months, 6 months, not access your extranet. I don't even remember my credentials anymore. We need to make it very easy for people to reset that and come in. So we want to have a forgot password link on there. I can put my email address in. What it'll do is send me an email with a token link that I can click on and let me reset my password. So it's completely self-service. IT doesn't need to be involved. In fact, Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada doesn't even have an IT organization, so it's not like we can defer to them to do these kinds of things. We wanted to make things very simple from a self-service perspective. So we got 2 emails here. One is the request has been sent. So this, I'm wearing my hat as the person who's come in to register on the site. Thanks for registering. You're going to get a second email once your account has been confirmed. And the second email here is to me, the person that was named as the approver for the account. So I need to click here to approve this person. So obviously, I need to authenticate myself to say, yeah, I really am somebody who can vouch for this person. I do have access. So I'm going to use that second email address that was named as the approver to sign into the system. Now, I'm kind of weird because I'm a kind of an elevated user, so I actually have all of the clubs in here. I have to choose which club I want to associate this person with, so I can grab the Boys and Girls Clubs appeal. Normally, I'm only associated with one club. That they would already be selected, and all I would see is this approve button here. I go ahead and click on that, and I'm done. That's all I had to do. So we want to keep that approval process very simple and straightforward for them. So we're going to see a third email come through now. This will be back to the person that registered saying, hey, Peter just approved you. You're good to go. Here's a link to go in, set your password, and you can now access the site. So if we come back to our previous window here, we'll give that a minute to come through. And actually, I'm still signed in as the administrator there. Let me just sign in as a different user. We'll wait for that email to come through. Actually, I've got an older one down here that I can use. This confirmation. I did a dry run with Brad before we got, because I was afraid of delays on the emails. So basically, I've got a link here to click and set my password. So now it knows based on that link in my email, who am I? It's time expiring, so if I don't use that within 2 hours or 1 day or whatever we've set it from a policy point of view, that link is no longer useful. All I do is enter my new extranet password, confirm it. Password's been changed. I now have access to the site. I come back to the home here. Let me just maximize this again for us. Click on the members link. We'll use that email address that we just created the account for. And we're in the site. Now, I should have shown you briefly before, the site has morphed and changed a little bit for us. We didn't have all of these menu options in here. So basically what we've done is we've secured certain areas of the SharePoint site to say these are only available to members. So you have to log in, you have to authenticate to see that content. And we can come down into an example here like the BGCC brand. So all of their brand information, all their positioning, their logos, their documents, everything about their brand is available in the Extranet site. All you need to do is log in and download it. It becomes much easier. So from a digital brand management point of view, rather than people grabbing logos randomly off of sites and kind of assembling their own brand around that, they can go into the site here, get the approved guidelines, understand how they're supposed to use that, and really effectively use the Extranet. In fact, if we come back to the main members page here, it looks like the home page of the site, but it's actually a little bit different. We're actually down in the members site, and we see that there's members news here. There's actually some social sides. We can come in the blog, see what the CEO is blogging about, and really start to connect and collaborate with the organization. So the idea wasn't just to push information out to the organization, but to build an online community that they can share best practices and ideas back and forth through that. So that was really it for the demo. We want to keep some time open. We've got about 7 minutes or so left in the talk here to answer some questions and go from there. So let me bring the last few closing slides up on the screen here.
Yeah, so what we did on the, I actually created a resource slide for you guys. So now the process stuff isn't necessarily in these resources, but all the architecture, all the different technologies, SharePoint and rights management, there's a lot of links in there for you. There's actually one of these, I should have actually put some English in there too so you'd see it, but one of those is actually an extranet like Center of Excellence for SharePoint that we publish. And so if you're interested, I'm hoping it's the first one. I think I'd be kind of an idiot if I didn't make it the first one. But click on it and you'll just see everything you need to know about extranets. That's where I got a lot of my information in addition to just working with customers and stuff. So reference this and use this as you want. And like I said, steal that process, have fun with it. If you make changes to it, if you find stuff that I forgot, feel free to email me and I'll add to it. And just let me know what you think about it. So that's it.
And likewise, at the bottom down there, there's links to the actual site there. There's a much more detailed case study, video case study on the Boys and Girls Clubs if you want to dig into that and learn more about that, by all means.
Cool. If you got questions, hit the mics or you know,
or just
yell loud and we'll repeat the question.
Over here. So the question was, is forms-based authentication still there in 2010? Absolutely, yes. So the login page that I was showing you there was a forms-based login. You have to use claims-based in SharePoint, but it absolutely supports forms-based, yes. Right, so the question was, are you able to have one URL or do you have to two URLs? So as I mentioned, you want to ensure that you do have one URL. So the out-of-the-box forms-based does let you do that. It's a little bit kludgy because you get a choice page that comes up that says, do you want to do Windows or Forms before you log in? And then it takes you to the appropriate login page. We've actually solved that. We built some additional customizations that remove that from there. But yes, the goal is you don't want to have two separate URLs in there. Sorry, right down in front here.
So the question is there a user limit in an Active Directory or SharePoint?
In SharePoint.
Or SharePoint in 2010?
So it's more about ACLs. I mean, there is issues, and it's better in 2010 in terms of the numbers of permissions you put on individual objects. We generally recommend that you don't declare tens of thousands of users individually to objects. You use groups, and that kind of takes that issue away. So I don't know if that answers your question for you, but that's the best solution to address that.
I don't know if there's an actual hard limit. Yeah.
I mean, you can have hundreds of thousands of users in there. Just don't individually assign every one of them to one item from a permissions point of view.
Yeah.
Sorry, over here.
How does the RMS work with external users? Do they need access to the RMS server?
That's a great question, yeah. So the question was rights management services, which I talked about. How does, since the server sits inside your firewall, if somebody opens the document outside the firewall, how do they authenticate? You basically got to, there's two ways to do it. Punch a hole so that they can actually get in and authenticate, right? Or there are third parties that will essentially kind of not host your RMS. You still have to have the RMS server, but kind of proxy that out here so you can do that, and it makes it a little bit easier. Do they need to install anything? Office 2003 and later? I know it's 2000. Yeah, I think it's 2003 and later to access it. And if they don't have Office 2003, from a read-only perspective, there's actually an add-in for Internet Explorer that allows them to open it and look at it. They can't make edits, but they can at least look at it.
Sorry, question back here?
Yeah, for SharePoint Online, do you know if they're going to open that up to allow more than one federated source?
They do. Like you can have multiple trusted providers in one SharePoint site, if that was your question?
No, for SharePoint Online.
Oh, online. I'm sorry. I missed that part.
It's a big limitation.
It's not today. It's not today. You know, it's our goal to get there, but yeah, it's not today. Yes? Yeah, so RMS by itself, that's a great question. What file formats will RMS work on? So by itself, it will only work on Office documents, but there are partners that add in the ability to handle other document types.
One over here.
So when you use Federation, will it auto-send credentials like it does for an internal network?
So the question was, will it auto-send credentials when you use Federation? And the answer is it depends on what you've done on the receiving side. So it's really up to the...
It
Yeah, so if they've set up their secure token service appropriately on their side to auto sign in, then yes, they don't even see the login page and they come right through.
Can you have if you want to, if not
Gotta show it.
Federation and some are going to have SQL-based authentication, we're going to have 2 URLs, right?
No. So the question was, can you have a single URL for both SQL forms-based authentication and federation? And the answer is yes. You can. You still have that choice screen that says which one do you want to come in on. Again, we've some customization. We can solve that, but you can have a single URL that allows internal Windows authentication, forms-based, and federation all at the same time, all in one URL. Absolutely. So I've got a couple of my staff here. What they can do is they can tap your badge to get information, and I can provide some details on exactly how we're doing that multi-authentication against the one URL, because that's something we've done a lot of research work on. We're pretty proud of what we've created from there. So Jody at the back here can do that for you. Amanda in the far back corner there can grab that for you. By all means, I'm going to be available outside the hall to answer some questions as well.
No other questions? Oh, one quick.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Yep.
You. That's real hard to hear.
Sorry, I'm going to walk back
a
a bit.
bunch of boxes up here running with fans. So.
So the question is, can you restrict people search so it only searches the staff and not the partners, or vice versa? Right. So it's really about how do you lock down the people search. And I don't know if you want to take this one, but honestly, we haven't lit up the people search generally on extranets.
I haven't been through restricting people search. We can talk afterwards and get.
It's
you
an interesting question, though. Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't because typically in extranets you're not doing people search per se. I mean, I guess you are, but most of the times they already know the people that they need to communicate with, and because they have direct contacts into your company. So you don't really see. I haven't seen that a lot on extranets.
I'd have to say the same. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
It's an intranet feature, not generally an extranet. But
yeah.
Certainly, something like boys and girls, we've actually talked about that because we want to expose all that profile information to everybody in the organization.
I guess it could get interesting if you want to have just like a generic, people log in and then they need like help, and you've got 10,000. Like a Dell or an HP or something that's got a huge support staff and they want to search for somebody to talk to maybe, but I don't see that too often. Anything else? Once again, I want to promote the session after us down in 201. So if you liked what we were talking about and you want to get deeper, then those guys down there are having a session. So
and by all means, if you want to have a one-on-one, I'll be available outside.
We'll be hanging out. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.